Hello everyone and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your break and took the opportunity to catch up with people in the queue for cake. Our final session today is on infrastructures with some brilliant speakers. A reminder that the Q&A will take place at the end of the session, so please post your questions in the comments section on the right, and we will get to them at the end of the talks. So I'll do my best to follow the chat, but do keep those questions and discussions happening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Daria Sabulska from Wikimedia, who will be giving us a brief introduction to Wiki Data. Daria.
Hello, and can I have, oh yeah, perfect. I'm Daria Sabulska from Wikimedia UK. I'm a program director there, and Wikimedia UK, my organization, is a charity that supports open knowledge projects like Wikipedia, Wiki Data in the UK. This is an introductory talk about Wikidata, but I am very aware this is a museums and tech conference, and a lot of people would have heard of it. So I've prepared a pad with some resources and further links for you. That's the link on the slide here. And please follow it for some visualizations, some further resources, things that you can explore some more. But for now, a bit of an introduction. So Wikidata is a sister project of Wikipedia. It's a free knowledge base about the world that can be read and edited both by humans and by machines. And it's developed, added by a community of volunteers, just like Wikipedia, and heritage museum professionals are very welcome as well to share their knowledge. It is multilingual, so information added in one language can be used across other languages as well, which I think is very powerful. It consists of millions of items, each representing a thing, a person, place, an artwork, a concept, and that information is presented in triplets. So you would have a thing, or a person like Lord Byron, its property, so for example, a member of, and then a value of it. So in this case, Royal Society. The properties can also be external identifiers, like here the Library of Congress ID, I think, which means that it can be connected to a lot of external resources and databases as well. It has the statements, but it also has sources of the data. It has links to other places. So it creates this sort of federated, connected structure of information. With regards to what sort of data can be added, it's sort of pitched at like a basic level of information about the world with links to other resources for more specialized information. And the sources of data have to be reliable and publicly available. Also, the data on Wikidata is licensed on Creative Commons CC0 public domain license. But if you're thinking whether your data is at an appropriate level and whether it's copyrighted in the correct way, it really depends case by case. So I think it's best to have a conversation with the community or with an organization like Wikimedia UK to really explore and see whether what you have could be added onto Wikidata. The other thing to say is that the project will be 10 years old next year, so it's constantly developing and trying to plug its content gaps, to engage with the biases that might be in the content and also in the data structure. So we're always keen to work with specialists like museum professionals to make it better. With why people would, why you might consider adding and working with Wikidata, it's one of those combined platforms where a lot of different information comes in. So a bit like Chris Unit was talking yesterday in the keynote, it's not organization centric, it's more broad than that, but hopefully still very useful. to you and the world. And here is some benefits. So it can help people see your information because the data from Wikidata gets pulled to many other high traffic places like Wikipedia, Google search results, Siri, things like that. In the similar vein, it can improve open knowledge. So things added onto Wikidata can be used to create articles on Wikipedia, updated, and also it's used in many other places on the internet. It can increase traffic back to your website because the sources of data would be linked with clickable reference, and that can kind of route people back. But I think most excitingly, it can make your data more useful to you, but also and to others. Because of how the project is structured, it has a lot of tools created by the community that can be used to combine your data with other data, to query it, to use tools to visualize your information in different ways. And I think this is really exciting for the sort of preliminary research, some questions, explorations that people might want to do, and reach of content, a bit like what we heard in the Towards National Collection presentation earlier today. And some of those tools to do that are in the link that I shared. I'll share it in a second again for you. With how the sausages are made, how the data gets onto Wikidata, there's a few different ways of doing that, starting from sort of individual edits and contributions to particular items. And again, I'll give you a link to a tutorial on that. But there's also some more sophisticated ways of mass uploading the tools. And those links are some of the tools that are currently available to do that. I think, again, it's quite helpful to work with Wikidata community to get help with mass uploads, or indeed get in touch with an organization such as Wikimedia UK for help in stewarding that process. We're particularly interested in aspects of underrepresented or marginalized information, so would try to help with projects like that. I wanted very quickly to give you an example of a collaboration with Wikidata that's not very sophisticated technically. This is a project that was worked on a two-day hackathon with a community group, with volunteers with some technical knowledge that wanted to increase the representation of memorials of women in Scotland. Because it's said that in some cities in Scotland, there's more memorials of animals than of women. So this was a way of bringing that knowledge to the forefront on Wikidata and then onto Wikipedia as well. This is some pointers of what they did. Got an existing database of the memorials, put them on Wikidata, linked them with the IDs of the women of whom the memorials there were, sometimes created the items if they didn't exist before. And that work gave them functionality and possibility of exploring this data in a new way. So for example, they were able to generate a map that showed the memorials and which ones of those were missing pictures, for example, which then created almost like a to-do list for volunteers to illustrate the memorials. And also they could do a query to see which of the women and memorials were missing articles. And if you follow the link at the bottom of this slide, you will see the query that we're able to generate and then have, again, like a to-do list for the community. Some quick other possibilities, because they really are endless, but I'll show you a few. So here is a search for works by Raphael in IIIF, and as you can see, it comes from a lot of different organizations. This is something that can be generated through Wikidata, and you get this illustration of the works. Another example, a bit niche perhaps, but an image grid of artworks of landscapes that are more taller than they're wide, and again in this sort of image landscape, bringing together many sources of artworks in one place in an interesting query. Another one that I won't really go into, but this is also a query that's possible to generate from Wiki Data of an item and people linked and in some ways connected to the Bodleian library, and a beautiful way of showing how different things are connected to each other. There's lots more that I could say, but here is that link again with some resources for you to explore, and also contact details to me and Wikimedia UK as well, if you would be interested in a collaboration. I think that's all I wanted to say. So any more questions? I look forward to the Q&A later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daria. That's a really useful introduction to a very complex architecture in 10 minutes. Absolutely. Okay, next up, we've got Hembo Pagi from Archaeovision on linking the physical and digital world. And I'll pass straight on to Hembo. Thank you.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. As said, I'm Hembo from Archaeovision, a company with the main focus on cultural heritage documentation and presentation. 6 centuries ago, the first cabinets of curiosities appeared in Europe, and these mostly show-off collections are the predecessors of our museums. There has been very little change over the last 600 years when it comes to the key element what the museums do, which is telling the story now of the object. Saying that, we can see in Estonia as well elsewhere in Europe that like a big and rapid change in the museum landscape. There are less objects, physical objects on display, and more like a digital and interactive screens everywhere. Also, we are witnessing the process where our lives are moving online, and more ideas, concepts, and subcultures only appear online in the contacts without any physical objects. But today I'm not going to talk about what the museum is or how one should display museum objects or what the museum object is. So my talk instead is about the link between or linking the physical world with the digital. And what do I mean by that? In the museum world, an object accession number has been used to link object and the description in a catalog or more familiar in a collection management system. An object number is usually marked on the object as a way to create a physical link back to the description in a central catalog. Sounds simple and robust enough, so does it actually need any improvement? And it is simple in principle, but when it comes working in this kind of hybrid world where we have physical objects and the digital database systems, the issue is the speed. Imagine the inventory where you need to check 10,000 objects. Spending 1 second or 5 seconds querying your object from the collection management system provides a big difference in the time and staffing requirements. So what was taking like 14 hours could be take like 2 or 3 hours. And scale this to the collections with like millions of objects. So the time versus output becomes even more beneficial when collated in a database that can be easily queried. So how this could be achieved in an affordable way? We have been working with 3 Estonian museums, Estonian War Museum, Estonian Olympics and Sports Museum, and the Coastal Folks Museums, where we have utilized machine-readable labels and the barcode scanner to implement and speed up the inventory and digitization process. So the link between the digital and physical world is the machine-readable barcode. One can say that there's no innovation there. Barcodes have been around for the last 30 years at least. And those been used mainly to speed up the tasks and processes which are like a monotonous and tedious data entry and not intellectually very stimulating. Also often leads to human errors. So also we can see them everywhere, in shops, in libraries, warehouses, but strangely enough, not so often in museums. So where did we start from? We were working with Estonian War Museum and looking through their object life cycle and finding bottlenecks in our kind of processes. And museum found many ways to improve and their work, and we came up with a solution to speed up the inventory and digitization process. Our solution was to implement bespoke labels with barcodes. As the Estonian Museum Information System, which is the collection management system all the Estonian museums are using, does not support barcodes or any kind of machine-readable codes, we had to kind of extend it in kind of the user side. So we were using Chrome extension for that. And currently, it only works with this particular system, collection management system, but it's very easy to extend to any web user interface. For users, other than a couple of extra fields, very little changes at the kind of the user interface. The majority of the work required happens behind the scenes, with functionality added to make the codes, which are numeric, compatible with museum accession numbers, which are alphanumeric. Queries on different pages are also added to include some extra tasks, such as selecting an item for inventory or pre-filling some in some fields based on content associated with the code. The feedback received from the museums we've been working with is very much focused on time saved during the inventory, which can be measured by weeks and even by months, depending the collection size and tasks performed. The inclusion of barcodes has also like a knock-off effect on digitization practice. As we work within the digitization ourselves, we implemented barcodes into our digitization workflow. So where the barcode is read during the image capture or automatically or with the barcode reader, and then generated file names generated based on that. Again, this saves a significant amount of time in providing outputs and a link at the metadata level that allows for data to be assimilated by a museum. For museums who digitize themselves, or the museums or organizations who buy the service in, it means that they can digitize more with the resources they have, either like time or money, and know that the link between the captured content can be linked back to the physical object through that automated process. The advantages of machine-readable codes include things such as tracking locations, who handled the object last, what's the current happening, what's currently happening with the object, and so on. We have proved that the system like this works within the museum setting. And such a process is already based for all the library loans, and linking the physical with the digital through such a method provides a footing on which other technologies can be integrated. That allows for a museum to main its source data in a more reliable and a systemic way that benefits the museum, the people who work there, its customers, and those who work with the object on a commercial or research capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hembo. Lots of really interesting tech in there that I'm sure a lot of our community want to get their hands on. Okay, we'll hopefully pick up a lot of those things in the Q&A later. And on to our final talk now. Final talk of the conference is delivered by a small army made up from Cooper Hewitt and surface impression and knowledge integration. I think Rob from KI will join us later on, but firstly, Adam, Kang, and Peter, who are going to be reimagining the museum's collections API. Over to you guys.
Hi, Kang, I can start. So this is a project about reimagining the museum collection API. Next slide. I am Adam Quinn, a digital product manager at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Next.
Hi, I'm Peter Pavement. I'm the CEO of Surface Impression. The next slide. We also have Rob Tice, who'll be joining us for the Q&A from Knowledge Integration. And next.
And hello, everyone. My name is Peng. I'm a senior digital engineer from Cooper Hewitt.
Great. For those of you who don't know the museum, Cooper Hewitt is a design museum in New York City. Actually, Hembo used the ledger from the Cooper Union Museum of Decorative Arts in his presentation. I thought that was a nice detail. In 2014, the museum reopened, and a new series of digital experiences that were based on an API that was developed essentially for those experiences. The API was underpinning the entire interactive. Over the years, after the beta was launched, a few developers came in and made tweaks. Things started to go wrong in the system, and the museum basically has failed to adequately maintain and upgrade the API and the pipeline. And right now, currently, because of these changes, making changes to the front-facing data is all done manually by the curators. So there is no automatic process. Next slide. So right now, with this project, we're really addressing the past, looking at this legacy data, how the data was originally modeled, working with the Data Standards Committee to make sure that even if we update the API itself, we want to make sure that the data is correct. So this project is really looking forward to what our data standard needs to be, what the model is, and what the access is through the API. So our new API all relies on a really wonderful pipeline that I hope Rob can tell you lots of more technical details once we get into it, because he spearheaded it. But basically, in 2021, no one has time to resize or copy media. So the pipeline is really about making sure that we move collection data from TMS into an Elasticsearch efficiently, making the appropriate connections, making sure that everything is open source, being able to integrate into AI in between in these steps, and then make sure that when we do publish, right now we're actually publishing into a GraphQL API, but we could later want to work in a REST API. We want to make sure that no matter what we do, it's built on top of good data and good practice. And also, we're trying to use as much out of the box as possible. So enterprise search, like Elasticsearch, IIIF, using microservices like Kang as the gateway, a public for public access to our API and a private access to our API possible for future projects. And then any pluggable authentication like Keycloak for creating user accounts and getting tokens, and make sure that everything is automatic using the SIM. And is really an accessible backend for our registrars and curators to verify the data before it goes public. Next slide. And here's sort of what that looks like. And so we're really extracting the data. We're modeling it to make sure that everything is as it is on the back end. We're not, we're not breaking it down. We're enhancing it by adding possibly Google Vision to it, adding any color RGB information. We're checking to make sure that any links are there and flagging anything if it doesn't make sense. Here's where we cross-reference. So if there are makers making those sort of CDOC CRM connections between how things came to be and how things are connected, so that later we can merge into those systems, and then really publishing into an Elasticsearch so that all of it is searchable and sort of front-end API gateway agnostic.
Great, thank you, Adam. Oh, yes, that one. So a central part of this project has been a focus on the user, basically who is going to use this API and what kind of documentation do they need. And something that really has gone a long way to inform this project is a study undertaken by the Pratt Institute at the end of 2020, looking at working with users to look at 4 museum APIs, so at the Met, the Smithsonian, Cleveland Art Museum, and Cooper Hewitt. And so they did some testing with a panel of different participants, and they asked them how they use cultural heritage APIs, what the usability of those interfaces were, and the documentation for them, and basically what they were looking for from an API. And this is a fascinating kind of sense check for the sector that came up with lots of different insights. And we were able to kind of boil that down to sort of 5 key recommendations. The first thing was to empower users to get started easily, to provide a glossary and terminology. There's lots of jargon in this world of APIs. You've just heard a whole load of it. And to provide documentation for different user types. So recognizing that people are coming from all sorts of backgrounds and with all sorts of motivations to use APIs. The other thing is to highlight example projects. Inspiration always comes from seeing what other people do, and is to provide comprehensive examples too. So next slide, please. And you can see a couple of graphs that came from that report. On the top left, you can see the different kind of sectors that those participants came from. So we have tech professionals was the largest group there on the right, and they have a lot of technical skills, but not much museum knowledge. And you can see museum professionals sort of top middle, and we also have students and hobbyists. And bottom right, you can see their areas of interest, what they wanted to query from museum collections. And always interesting to see that they're looking for people. Artists and creators are definitely the kind of the top of the stack there. But also you can see images and dates and so on. And exhibition history is something that we often neglect as we put together data sets for the sector. Next slide, please. So in response to this, we've been creating a documentation website to help people to get into the API and to provide some of these things that the Pratt Institute highlighted. So we have a kind of friendly site that looks a lot like the main Cooper Hewitt website. It's designed with the same styling, and it's meant to be as accessible as possible. And you can see things like on the screen here that the technical terms are highlighted and from the get-go, so you can kind of investigate those and find out what to do. Next slide, please. And as Adam said, this API is a little unusual, on the kind of cutting edge of APIs, as it were, in that it uses GraphQL as its query language, the QL of GraphQL, to access the data. And that's not as familiar to a lot of people working with APIs as other formats, such as REST. So the documentation really needs to help people get to grips with GraphQL and how easy and flexible it is. But it's new as well. Next slide, please. And one example of how we do that is to show a record, so an object from the collection, and to break that down field by field so that people can really explore the anatomy of a record. And you can also see here that the terms within that anatomy are glossary terms, and we've clicked on one, and you can see the accession number has been defined, and people can so then access all of those different things, even if they're not familiar with what accession number is. Say they come from a tech background and they have no idea what museums mean when they talk about accession. Next slide, please. The other thing that the site provides is as a playground that people can put their queries in and see the data that comes back from that right away. And that's been a really nice feature that we've been able to integrate. Next slide, please. Oh, back one. There you go. And the other thing is that any code examples that we give within the documentation link to that front end. So you can see the try it out button underneath that search for agents example. And if you click that, you can perform that query right away and see what happens. Next slide, please. And we also have a showcase of projects that use data from Cooper Hewitt's collection, and just to act as inspiration and to hopefully become the basis of a future showcase items of lots of interesting items that people have made. Next slide, please. And so we ourselves are using the API to kind of create a little widget to make it easier to understand the nature and the breadth of the data, but also the GraphQL interface. So we're putting together this spin the wheel interactive where you can essentially press a button and it'll produce something random for you. So next slide, please. So if it spins, it will then light on a category or type of object and a decade that it came from. And it will show you the query that will make give you access to those records. And so you can see that query, how it is made, what it's about, and some of the aspects of that, and then press send this query. Next slide, please. And then you'll see the data that's returned for that, and a little illustration of the object that actually represents. So that way people who aren't familiar with museums or aren't familiar with GraphQL can kind of see this right in front of them happening and have a much more accessible way into those concepts. Next slide, please. So we're kind of halfway through creating the documentation and the API itself. And so part of the ongoing kind of checking in with users is our program of user testing. And that's being led by Pratt Institute's students. So we have that nice continuity from the original study. And so Ali and Christy from Pratt have been working with different users, and you can see a little screenshot there from a live evaluation that they've been doing with a couple of testers. So they are evaluating how users understand what the API is and what it can be used for and why they might want to do that. They're also doing heuristic assessments of the site's usability, so getting that nice kind of third-party look at it. And live testing, as I mentioned, with people who work with APIs but don't know museums, and the opposite, people who work in museums but don't know APIs. So we can always see how our different user groups are interacting with it. And back to you, Adam, for the conclusion.
Oh no, what am I concluding?
Oh yeah, last slide.
Yeah, no, I think and all of this came down to really doing that upfront Pratt work. Who's using it? Who are we building it for? What are we going to use it for? And really understand how the community is using it. What are they doing, and what do they need to be able to do that? And then how does it? We like to, the word is a hot topic, but is it interoperable? Right? Can we use this data between collections? Can we make sure that we are standard enough to really sort of move into that CDOC CRM world and make those connections between people? And are we explaining, back to the documentation, are we explaining ourselves well enough? We really looked at, again, as Peter said, those museum professionals that might not have a lot of technical information, who need that glossary about technical terms, and the technical people that might not know a lot about museums, who need to know the museum terminology. So really crossing that bridge. And then the API itself has just got to be able to do all the things. And so I think if you check off all those boxes, then you've got yourself a nice little product. Did I do it? How's my wrap up today?
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
great.
You.
That was a long minute, but well worth it. You're lucky you're right at the end of the conference. Thank you all. And really chuffed that our stateside contingent managed to join so early in the day. Okay, let's bring everyone back to stage, Hembo and Daria. And we've got Rob as well, who's here for the Q&A. Okay, so I'll try and... Hi, Rob, good to see you. Okay, so let's work through some of the questions. Okay, we did have a couple of comments actually around the Wiki Data stuff, Daria, right at the beginning. And John Stack actually, it was a comment, not a question, but has a property which has archives at, which might be a lightweight way of playing with Wiki Data. Have you got any thoughts of that?
Yeah, I thought that was a good shout, because the likelihood is there is some information from your organization already on Wikidata, and yeah, I just thought, yeah, that would be a good way of seeing what's already out there and then starting to think how it could be connected, whether you're happy with what's there. Yeah, I concur.
Excellent. And there are actually a whole load of tools and pointers that you put in a document that is a really handy link. So is there anything in particular you want to pull out of that? I mean, one of the questions I had was around, I guess, onboarding organization who are interested in collaborating. What data do you share with them? How can they understand the reach, but also how do you support them?
Yeah, great question. I think the nature of open data or open knowledge, I guess, in the wiki projects is that they're extremely open, but through that maybe not so guided to a user journey. So I think it can be a bit of sort of throwing people on the deep end of the project and seeing how they can find their way, which is why I've put those resources together. A lot of it is sort of one-to-one conversations, for better or worse, like I was saying in the presentation. So I would probably try and design a customized journey. So with the organization, have a conversation with them to see what resources they have and what could be applicable to Wikidata. Otherwise, it's a bit of a self-guided exploration, I think, for the project.
That's really good, because obviously you want to engage with the organizations with such huge amounts of data potentially to share with Wikimedia.
Yes, yes.
Okay, let's move on. Now, there was a question for Hembo, and it was, let me just find it now. I think it was around the Chrome integration. I think there'll be a bit of interest in getting some of the playtime with that Chrome extension. Sarah Cole said, how difficult is it to create / deploy a Chrome extension? I haven't seen one like this before.
Actually, it's quite straightforward. It's mainly like a JavaScript. And yeah, basically you can include almost any user interface elements to your whatever you have on your screen user is interacting with, and process the data, like pre-process it, or so. Yeah, you can do many things. So it's quite relatively easy, and we also run like an API calls from the extension, so to check some data or convert the numeric data into alphanumeric. So you can do many different tasks behind. But yeah, I would say it is relatively more easy and more even more accessible than I thought it was. At least for this kind of relatively simple application. I know you can build very more complicated with different options and the user interface, but yeah, our extension doesn't provide anything extra and kind of user interface elements as a part of the extension as a separate thing. It puts everything into the existing user the website, what users are working with.
Okay, thank you. And we had a question from Jake as well. Did you consider the use of QR codes versus barcodes, and what were the considerations?
Yeah, there was actually even the Estonian heritage board. They had some sort of a research. They looked into the different ways of marking or labeling objects in the museums, and what could be those different machine readable codes. And in Estonian content, it came out that as we use the Estonian Museum Information System, produces a unique ID for each object in the system. And this remains the same, even, let's say, the object changes the ownership from one museum to another, the ID remains the same. So it seems the most reliable piece of information to link your kind of the machine readable kind of piece of information. But yeah, you could do the same with the QR code, but we really didn't see the need for it. As one reason people use barcodes are one is that you can attach a functionality, like open this website on your phone or call to this number. But as we don't need that, we only need this 8 or 10 digit number. We didn't need the functionality what QR or any matrix code provides.
Thank you, Hembo. Let's move on to some questions for the Hewitt and partners as well. We were very interested in the playground, actually, a lot of interest in that. Alec asked, what sort of usage does a playground get? And that was a question that I wanted to ask as well.
It's a good question, but it's a pre-release product. So the right answer is right now, just the user testers. But it will be really interesting to see sort of what that comes out like in the stats, and so we'll be tracking that with events and other things in analytics. My guess is that quite a lot. If you want to try any of those things, you end up in it. So I think that was our idea, is that by basically even just to look at some code, you end up there, and then you'll start to want to tinker. So that's kind of the theory behind that. So we'll see how that bears out in real life usage.
Thanks, Peter. And we've got a question from Clavier as well. There's a large number of images in the collection that need licensing for reusability. Can you identify what restrictions will copyright and limited licensing will bring in the usage of APIs for open data? Quite long in there.
Yeah, it's a question for Cooper Hewitt. Yeah, so from our Cooper Hewitt's TMS database, our register and curators works very hard to put the copyrights flags to the images and our objects data. So it would be part of the data we trying to extract out. We're trying to bring as much data as possible to the public, but there are some images and data that should be private and cannot be reused. So that will be flagged in the API as well, and it is part of the conversation we are currently have with our curators and the register. When you get API database, I believe you will see there's a copyright information there to indicate you can reuse it. We have a bunch of, actually, like, if not, I believe it's like 40,000 CC0 images and objects data for reuse. So I think it's a lot.
Okay, thank you. And you've been kind enough to share some links as well in the discussion. Lots of discussions going on. We've got a question as well from Richard Light, who asks, what about Sparkle as the API query language? Isn't GraphQL product specific?
So GraphQL isn't product specific. GraphQL is a query language that was originally developed by Facebook, and it's designed to kind of minimize traffic, so you can only request the things that you need, and it kind of frames the questions in the way the API in the way you would want to ask the questions. You know, I'm interested in the names of the people who made these things, so it felt like it fitted really well with a way to engage non-technical users even in what APIs can do from you. And whereas Sparkle and RDF has many uses and is helpful in many ways, the words helpful and engaging don't always fit with Sparkle, in my opinion. So I think that it's one of those examples where I think that different technologies potentially have different audiences, and so nothing that we've done excludes the idea that the data can be in Virtuoso and have a Sparkle endpoint as an alternate way of presenting it. That's not part of what we're doing now, but it's certainly not, the choices don't preclude that. But I think for an engagement perspective, you know, and scalability and usage and all those things, Sparkle wasn't at the top of the list in this particular case.
Thank you. I'm aware of time. I'm sure we could carry on this discussion for a while, but it's time for the closing remarks of the conference now. So I'm sure you'd all be very grateful in the audience for the time spent by all our speakers today, but particularly in this afternoon session, Adam, Peter, Rob, and Kang, and Daria and Hembo for their presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so it remains for me to close the conference, and I hope you've all enjoyed Museums and Tech 2021. It feels like we've had more than a day's worth of sessions. We've crammed a lot in, to be fair. So we kicked off yesterday with Chris Unit, who spoke about the promise of data, highlighting the need for continual resourcing, and he gave us some practical ways to use data effectively to inform what we're doing. But unfortunately for Chris, he was upstaged by his daughter joining him on screen. In yesterday's sessions, we covered user experience, how to inform the development of experiences in museums and cultural organisations, both online and on site. We learned about the importance of capturing audience perceptions, user behaviour, and personalising experiences for audience. And we also heard about data impact and engagement, how utilising existing external data sets can benefit social impact, applying models to determine engagement with museums, and the massive value of data sets as well. There were also interesting conversations in that session around the ethical implications of using data. And then to our keynote this morning, Rebecca Bailey, who gave us insight into the hugely ambitious Towards the National Collections programme, which highlights the diversity of our collections across the UK. But also, we got into the challenges of bringing them together and how we create an infrastructure that benefits the public and researchers across multiple collections. After that, we delve further into collections data, the challenges and solutions to data analysis and cleansing, the limitations of the content in our legacy databases, but also understanding the levels of engagement with our collections and what drives online traffic. And I won't dwell too much on the just hugely interesting infrastructure session we have just had. I also enjoyed the company of some of you as well in the virtual pub last night. Thanks for joining. And whilst it may have been bring your own drinks, we still had interesting conversations on ethics, digital skills, data analysis, and even NFTs. It's been all super interesting, and I have a lot of people to thank as a result. So firstly, thank you all to our fantastic keynotes, Chris Unit and Rebecca Bailey, for your insightful and thoughtful reflections. Thank you to our speakers. You've been interesting and inspirational and really entertaining at times, which is definitely something we all need. Thank you very much to our corporate members who have helped to make this conference accessible and sustainable. And especially a shout out for Mike Ellis from 38 Digital and their very generous contribution, both financial and practical, I might add. Thank you to the programme committee. I'm glad to see many of you in the conference as well who reviewed the proposals to help us form a brilliant programme. And thank you to the amazing MCG committees members, as usual, who have, despite everything, pulled together a brilliant 2 days. In particular, Sarah Middle and the programme team for putting the programme together, such fantastic and relevant topics. And Sarah Cole, who's been critical in setting Hopin and everywhere in the background, putting out digital fires. And finally, thank you for coming and helping us keep this community alive. I think one of the strengths of the conference is the opportunity to catch up, meet new people, and discuss the highlights of the year in museums and tech. So I'm pleased at least that we've been able to facilitate some networking bingo or chat roulette as described by Sarah Cole. And whilst it's sad that I can't point you in the direction of a follow-up venue, Sarah has set up a post-event lunch session so that we can continue discussions with our friends and peers. We're really keen to find out what you think as well. So posted in the chat now, hopefully, is a link to the attendee survey. So please make sure that you fill that in and help us improve museums and tech, whatever it may look like in the future. And also importantly, keep an eye out for committee places next year. We're keen to bring in new people all the time to keep the conference and our activities relevant. So that's it for next year. And it just remains for me to say goodbye and see you next year. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.